Hotep family. So hopefully you can all hear me. There's this video on YouTube called Underdevelopment in Africa. What's the real story? By this guy named Howard Nicholas. It's hosted by the Critical Collective, as you can see. This is part 1 of 3. The second part is unavailable. It's private for some reason, but you can see the other 2 links over here. I'm going to give you a little bit of description of this, and then I'm going to play this video. It's a 30-minute video, but I'm going to put some commentary, so it's going to be longer than that, obviously. But it's pretty interesting from the perspective of quote-unquote Marxists looking at the situation in Africa, and I think it's going to be worth your time as well as mine. So, and of course, if you like this, obviously do a thumbs up, subscribe, leave a comment, all that kind of good stuff, right? So this is part 1 of 3, the role of economic policies and international institutions in the underdevelopment of Africa. Howard Nicholas is a senior lecturer of economics at the International Institute of Social Studies. This is recorded in The Hague, International Institute of Social Studies, and so the questions to be asked are: what are the root causes of underdevelopment in Africa? What is the role of trade and institutions like the IMF? What is the role of imperialist wars and colonial legacy? And what are the hopeful social movements and initiatives in different African nations? It's a critical discussion organized by the Critical Collective, International ISS. So this is just going to be this video plus commentary, a reaction, of course, by yours truly, an African, right? No, you can call me Onitaset Kumat now, right? Author of the Book of Power. Now let's get into it. Let me know if you can hear it well.
So, I must thank the Critical Collective again for inviting me. I thought I never would after the last bad thing that I said. I must have upset lots of people, I'm sure. Every time I make a presentation, I upset lots of people, but never the Critical Collective, so we must be thinking alike. I congratulate them, really. It's amazing to see so many people here. And I also congratulate scholars for linking again with Critical Collective. It's been some time, and I hope this partnership continues and flourishes, because this is just amazing to see the number of people. I have to apologize for 2 things. The first is, I have to apologize in advance. I'm not an expert on Africa. What I'm going to offer you, perhaps it's not enough, but it's some commonsensical observations. I hope it's common sense. But sometimes it's better not to be an expert, to be able to see things from slightly afar. The second thing is, I'm wearing the wrong trousers. I was fixing my bike, so I wore my old trousers, and so please don't video this part, because my wife will immediately divorce me. Okay, so what I'm going to try and do is just give you some charts and a couple of tables, just to paint a little bit of a picture that you already know. Okay, so what this presentation is fundamentally designed to say is this: Africa, historically, Sub-Saharan Africa, has been fundamental to the global prosperity of the advanced countries. Okay? And Africa had a role to play. It has a role as a raw material producer. We will not allow Sub-Saharan Africa to escape that. Okay, we do everything to keep Sub-Saharan Africa where it is, also impoverished. It's absolutely vital for the prosperity of everyone else. So let's get clear about that. Okay, and this means all the economic structures, all the global institutions, and the economics we teach everyone is all designed to keep Africa exactly where it is. And whether it is Europe or US or now China, it's always the same. We need Africa to be impoverished, because we need those raw materials and we need them dirt cheap. Okay, so that's the message. It doesn't mean to say that there's nothing Africans can do. Of course there is. Okay, but this is the opposition that they're fighting. This is what it's about. Because if Africa does do something different, I assure you living standards of all those in Europe and North America and Asia is going to fall. Okay? And that is a big price to pay. I assure you that the West is not going to allow that without a big fight. Okay, so this is what it's fundamentally about. What I want to show you is how these structures are operating. It's just 20 minutes, so we can't do very much, but just to give you a little bit of an idea. And why I keep the ideology part there is because we are part of the producers of ideology. At universities and academic institutions, we are complicit in this whole enterprise. Okay, so the job of many Western academics is to convince Africans they have to keep doing what they're doing. Okay, and to show them it's your fault that you're poor. It's not our fault. It's your fault that you're poor. You know, so this is what we do in academic institutions, and I want to show that as well. We just start. This is what it's basically about, so you know what it's about. But I want to just show you the extent to which Africa is specializing in the production of raw materials and basic agricultural goods. We know the basic forces that have caused this underdevelopment. We know it's colonization. I will not discuss that very much because my colleague speaker is going to go into some aspects of this. But I do want to discuss the global economic structures, the global financial institutions, and economic ideology, briefly, to give you a flavor of those. Let me start with this. You can't really see it so easily, but if those of you who are interested, you want the PowerPoint, I'm sure we can make it available to you. But the thing that you really need to see is the top line. Okay? And the extent of dependency is captured by this statistic at the top. Okay? And you compare it with all other income groups, and what you see is essentially in that one statistic how dependent Sub-Saharan Africa is on raw material production. Okay? This is the very heart of what makes Sub-Saharan Africa beat. Okay? Here, just to have a look at one very important additional statistic, with all this export coming from Sub-Saharan Africa, how much does Sub-Saharan Africa account for in terms of global trade value? We know there are vast resources coming from there, but look at the bottom line in terms of global trade value. Look at that. 0.5%, 1975, 0.95%, going down to 0.1. To 0.1. Meaning that with all these vast resources being produced, how much are they getting for it? Nothing. Nothing. This is a very significant piece of data. Then I just want to show you what has happened to Sub-Saharan Africa, because what we know, and from all studies, no country ever develops without manufacturing. Okay, producing raw materials will not take you anywhere. Producing basic agricultural goods will not take you anywhere. And let's have a look at how much manufacturing activity takes place in Sub-Saharan Africa. We can look over the last 15 odd years, 15, 20 years. And we see manufacturing has actually declined as a percentage of the total. This is percentages of total production in Sub-Saharan Africa. How much of it is accounted for by manufacturing? So this figure here is 17% of the total. Most of the rest, when we talk of industry, it includes manufacturing, but the bulk of it is mining. Okay? raw material extraction. This is the bulk of it. And here we see actually raw material extraction has stayed the same. What has caused industry to fall is the fall in manufacturing production. This is deliberate because we will never, as Western economists, as Western policymakers, we cannot afford to allow Africa to industrialize and start producing manufactures. Okay, so we will do everything to stop that. And I'm going to show you how we actually block that.
Alright, so, I mean, I know some of you were like, wait, you just playing the whole video. I might, but not really. But this is actually, I want you to get, now this is what I was saying was interesting because, you know, shout out to KWZ Radio, and of course, Bit of Medicine podcast. There was this, during the podcast, someone mentioned Authors or mentioned economics, right? And I was like, you know, the way how this economist is laying it out is kind of what you want to see from what's his face, quote unquote, Eurasians, right? So this guy is from Sri Lanka, although he kind of looks like a white guy, but he's from Sri Lanka. I think he might be mixed. You know, Sri Lankans, if you don't know, they're like close to India, and so he might be like mixed with Indian and Dutch. So he's just a product. He's like a mulatto in that sense. Well, he's just a mixture in that sense. But I say this to say that, you know, as somebody who's speaking on Africa, you know, it's something that's kind of appealing to, you know, African people to see the numbers and the charts and the graphs and the reasoning behind it. I do want to emphasize, though, this, that part of the reason why Europe does not want Africa to industrialize is because then they have to compete for the minerals and the resources that otherwise they don't have to compete for now. You know? So essentially what I'm saying is this, that if you can get, basically it's like I asked this one brother. You know, one time I asked this brother, I said, he said, we're not getting a fair price for, let's say, coltan. And I said, okay, so what would you do with coltan? He said, I'll just leave it there. You know, like he's not going to try to manufacture. He's not going to try to do anything with it. He's just going to leave it there. And that's a response. That's an answer. But the reality is that if you don't have any use for the minerals in Africa, no matter how you say Africa's rich in minerals, then technically you can't really benefit, gain from it, or even be quote unquote rich from it. You know, all the same. If you can, however, do the manufacturing, if you can use the coltan, if you can build the computers, if you can build the laptops, if you can build the cell phones, then you can use the mineral resources. And with those finished products, then you would be a wealthy nation. You know? But not just a wealthy nation, but then Europe couldn't compete in the sense of, if 90% of the world's coltan is in the Congo, right, and the Congo is a manufacturing center, then Europe is not going to be able to produce these cell phones, and then they have to pay more to get their cell phones, you know, because they're going to have to get their cell phones from Africa. You understand? Or they're going to have to pay more to make cell phones because now there's a competing branch. You know, there's a Congolese branch that's saying, you know, we'll buy this coltan for this amount, or we'll buy this much coltan, and the Europeans say we'll buy this much coltan, and now all of a sudden they have a price war. But right now they don't have a price war. What they do is they send children to hand over bags of coltan for $5, you know, and those bags of coltan can make, you know, let's say 2,000 cell phones or 2,000 laptops, you know, because coltan's a superconductor, and you kind of, as far as I understand, you don't need to have that much in a device. It's just a matter of, but when you're making these, like it's like in the Intel chip, like the processors. So in those little chips, that's where you would find the coltan in a sense, or these minerals on the continent. Now, those are not huge portions, but you have to be able to engineer and micromanage. The point being, however, that these are minimal costs. Or I shouldn't even say they're minimal costs, in the sense that if you look up processors right now, okay, because some people like to build computers. If you look up processors right now, some of these processors run to $500. Okay, some of them run for $300, $400. That means that the little coltan inside of these tiny processors, right, can give you a profit of $500 for a tiny bit. You understand? But you're getting that tiny bit for that tiny essential bit for processors that run at the speeds that they're running today, right? I want to say gigahertz, right? At the 5 gigahertz or the 4 gigahertz or whatever, right? That tiny bit can get you $500, but you're getting that mineral for a penny or less than a penny. You understand? Now, if you're paying a fair price, and it's questionable what would be a fair price, but if you're paying a reasonable price, you might put it up to $1, which is fine, or $1 or $2, whatever. Or even, if you were really being excessive, it might be $200. If they were negotiating properly, but now if that's $200, now suddenly that processor goes up to $700, $800, $900. You understand? That processor suddenly goes up to $900 because the cost of production suddenly whatever. So now your cell phone that you usually take advantage of because your cell phone has that same coltan in it, and if it's being run up because of the processors in a sense, right? Now your cell phone is going to cost $200, $300 more. So you want to get yourself a cheap phone. Cheap phone nowadays might be $100, right? It's going to be a cheap phone. It's going to be $400, $500. You want to get a cheap smart TV for $300. It's now $700, $800. You understand? And this goes on and on. You want a cheap camera, right? It's now $500, $600, and it becomes that electronics become unaffordable, because the reason why the electronics are so cheap is because Africa's exploited, and that's really like one of the main things that you have to understand, that white people do not want to get rid of that kind of a system where they can get cheap electronics. And this is not just white people. This is like everybody in the West. Like right now, the people in the West, everybody in the West is fighting over or quarreling over a $600 stimulus check. Now, what if the cell phone? Now, of course, you already pay a whole bunch of money for an iPhone, an iPad, or whatever. But you probably even pay more money. Now, some of you who buy those stuff, you probably like, okay. But most reasonable people, other reasonable people are kind of not like that. But hopefully I just clarified that a little bit. But it's interesting because this guy is technically a little bit on. He's on point for our Eurasia.
It's obvious in certain ways, but it's less obvious in other ways. Now, we have actually seen periods of rapid growth in Sub-Saharan Africa, misleading people, saying, oh, we're now doing much better. And this has happened recently. Recently, I've had students come and tell me, we've done much better now. And you can see growth rates rose quite sharply in recent times. Now are starting to go again down. But if you look historically, the same thing happened earlier. Why? Because in these two periods, we had East Asian rapid industrialization processes. So in the earlier period, we had Japan and Korea and Taiwan. Okay, rapid growth, sucking in raw materials from Africa, driving up the prices, and then Sub-Saharan African countries grew. Exporting raw materials, they grew. But after those countries finished industrialization, then Sub-Saharan African growth rate again fell. Okay, but along comes China. Next wave. Okay, again, Sub-Saharan African growth rises, but now China is going down. As many of you now know from the press, China is going down. But Sub-Saharan Africa is going down even faster. to where we were again, with very low prices of raw materials, very low growth rates, and again the sorts of poverty that we saw once before. Because, bottom line, Sub-Saharan Africa is condemned to this role, just the supplier of raw materials, not a manufacturer. Very recent data showing...
By the way, that was actually a decent point in regards to how other people manufacturing, you know, and combating over the resources so that the prices are, you know, can be charged higher, right? Makes it so that, you know, more profit comes to the people who are supplying the materials. But when they no longer are competing, when they start cooperating with each other, or they are no longer in so much dire need for the materials like that, then the profits to the supplier goes down. You know, but of course, like I said, you know, and actually this is what this gentleman is going to, or I shouldn't say gentleman, but this individual is going to say after, which is that Africa needs to industrialize. Now, of course, he won't lay out how we would industrialize, and that's really the question that we should be, you know, wondering for ourselves. But, you know, it is really important, really critical for us to understand that being in this role of just providing the materials, in a sense, right, for other people is a dependent relationship, you know? And this dependence makes it so that you cannot really advance beyond those people that you depend on. But particularly if you have no autonomy, no say. Because as soon as, if you could fix your own prices, right, which is something that they're going to try, which is something that they're avoiding. If you could fix your own prices, that's a whole different story. But because you're not doing that, and he's actually going to go over it some more. That's why I'm kind of letting him speak a little, so that you know, we can get to that.
Emerging markets that produce raw materials against emerging markets that produce manufacturers. And you can see now with the weakness in the global economy, it's the emerging markets, that's the red line. It's those countries that are suffering the most, the emerging markets producing raw materials. They're suffering the most. And here it translates into their currencies being butchered. Okay? The currencies are collapsing of these countries, and many of them are sub-Saharan African countries. Some of them are Latin American countries, okay, who also rode that same wave. They thought that raw material production was going to save them. But now they're facing terrible problems. And I'm sorry to say, it's just going to get worse in the next 2 years. It's not going to get any better. And this is what it does in terms of gross domestic product. It's the blue line you should look at. It's the blue line compared with the red line. And what we know is that blue line is really going to go down sharply in the next 2 years. Okay, so relative to the rest of the world, sub-Saharan Africa is going to suffer. Again, why? Because it's condemned to this raw material production. This is basically why. How is it condemned to that? Well, the first and most important is the economic structures. After colonization ended, we needed new structures to keep these countries where they were. Okay? And the first of those is aid. Okay? We give them aid. Aid for what? Actually, we give them aid to keep repressive regimes in power. That's all. Okay? We're not giving them aid for much more except a little bit of infrastructure to make sure those raw materials get to the ports and aren't gotten out of the ground. But for the most part, we give repressive regimes money and power and guns to keep that system going. This is what it's fundamentally about. All the hypocrisy about transparency and democracy and bullshit like that, it's all bullshit. You know? And at least the Chinese don't enter into that bullshit. They say, we don't care about the whole political environment, we just give the money. Number two, and this was a very important one, still is debt. I was telling some of my students today, was it today or yesterday, about Confessions of an Economic Hitman. You remember this? Have any of you heard of this one? Confessions of an Economic Hitman. It's a book written by John Perkins, who used to work for a very nebulous, opaque bank. No one had ever heard of this bank, but it was formed in the 1950s by the IMF, the CIA, and the American State Department. And it had only one job: to lend money to developing countries that were raw material producers in order to indebt them. Once you are in my debt, I control you. Okay? And this bank had 4,000 employees. But no one ever heard of this bank, you see. But it would go to country after country offering loans. And if the president did not accept the loan, they were killed. And he gives two examples of presidents who were killed when they did not accept the loan. You see, the lending is also very important to trap the country. It's very important. It's part of that process.
So, all right, I don't really know economic hitman. When I first heard about it, I thought it was some conspiracy theory. I don't know if it is or isn't a conspiracy theory. It's interesting, and you kind of see from this presentation how this white boy is going to convince, a lot of African people into believing what he's saying. He speaks in such a way that you're kind of like with such a confidence in a sense that makes you think that whatever he's saying might well be the case. All the same, it's it is something to remember that assassinations and geopolitics are a thing. Influencing other countries to get into their resources is a thing. When I was in university, one of the reasons why I didn't really want to stick to astrophysics, right, was I found out that NASA was using the satellites to look for raw materials, like raw minerals in Africa. So part of the reason why I went to astrophysics was I was like, I want to do something with the stars so that I'm not really involved in the American war machine. But then I realized that actually, truly, there's nothing you can really do in America that's not really involved in the American war machine if you're really looking at it. Even if you were to say, let me just sit behind a telescope, the reality is that NASA, which obviously if I'm sitting behind a telescope looking at, distant galaxies, maybe I'm not really doing anything. But all the same, NASA was, like I said, it was using its satellites to look at raw material all over Africa, and in so doing, tell the U.S. soldiers where to go, what to do, where what have you. That's really the gist of it. That you there are people, you're up against an opposition that has a self-interest. That's really what it is, and of course this man is going to make it really objective. He's going to make it really plain, in your face, commonsensical. But it's really that's one of the issues I want us as African people to understand with regards to Eurasians and Marxism and leftism and all that kind of stuff, is that they kind of try to make it seem very objective, as opposed to the reality, which is that white people just have a different nature to them. And it's this nature that we're thinking is universal, is so on and so forth, when really it isn't. Really it's the case that it's, yes, white people, yes, you could say objectively people just want the minerals out of Africa, sure. But it's also the case of, only white people feel that they are entitled to the minerals of another land. You know what I mean? Or not just white people, but only Eurasians really feel that they're entitled to the minerals of another land without, per se, actually benefiting the people who are actually there. You know? Like white, well, only Eurasians believe in the exploitative model. You know, as opposed to just upfront giving the cost, the real market value for the coltan, and not just killing people and enslaving them and working children. Like, this is actually an absurd thing. But of course, it's only absurd to us in the sense that, you know, we say, oh, they're working children. For them, it's like they're just getting the minerals, you know? And if they're working a bunch of children to get the minerals, like, it's no real sweat off of their back, you know? Because it's not their children. You know, they wouldn't work, they would work their children themselves. That's another thing, too. Remember that the context that, for instance, Marxism comes up in is like Marxism. If you're not familiar with Karl Marx and Capital and all that stuff, is that it comes up in a situation like during the 1850s or 1840s or whatever, just the 19th century, where, you know, which is right next to slavery, right? But basically, white people. It's this white guy crying about how much white people are going through so much, and he's saying this, you know, while black people are enslaved, but one of the things is that, you know, white people were working like 10-hour shifts. You know, 10, 12-hour shifts. Well, of course, black people were working 14-hour shifts, but, you know, he didn't care. But anyway, the point is that they're working 10, 12-hour shifts, and they had children working in factories and people losing limbs and having to go to work and all that kind of stuff. So it was a weird, terrible situation, but that's what they were doing to themselves. So if they were doing that to themselves, it's as the African proverb goes, which is, if the crocodile eats its own eggs, what is it going to do to the flesh of a frog? You know? If they were working their children, you know, 100 years back, they're working their children in factories, you know, giving them manufacturing jobs. Why would they not give your children mining jobs? Now, we personally did not work our children like that. We figured, you know, children had a certain form of labor, and adults had a certain form of labor, you know? But that division of labor between child and adult wasn't really a thing for Eurasians, and that's just their different nature. It's not economics. It's not, I want profit, I want blah. It's wazungu economics. But the things that white people do is that they try to universalize their mentality, and in that sense, it kind of, like, if we don't look at them as universalizing, then we're gonna get into trouble, you know?
I teach in Suriname, and Suriname in recent times had a huge foreign exchange reserve, so big they didn't need to borrow money. And then one of my students, who was very high up in government, he said, you know, the IMF is trying to convince us to borrow money from foreigners. Why? I thought, duh, you know, sorry about this, but, you know, this is the game. And in the end, Suriname did borrow this money because the IMF said, if foreigners lend to you, then everyone will think Suriname is such a strong economy that foreigners are interested in lending to you. You understand? Before Lula came to power, you know, the previous president in Brazil, Cardoso, his predecessor, took a gigantic international loan. No necessity for taking the loan. Why? Because once I catch you with the debt strings, I hold you forever.
And see, I want you guys to realize this too. So if you heard what he just said, once I catch you, you can think. The reason why I even wanted to do this podcast was because during Bitter Medicine podcast, what was KW Don 7 in the chat said something that mirrored something that this guy Howard Nicholas said, and you could kind of see how just now Bitter Medicine podcast in the comments right here said, once you're in my debt, I control you, right? And just the same, Thomas Sankara, I think it was Thomas Sankara, or Amilcar Cabral, one of them, right? But they said the same, you know, he who feeds you controls you. And I mean, obviously this is like, you know, normal common sense thing, but I also want you to realize that a lot of these people, like Howard Nicholas or even Tim Wise or Sean King, what they do is they say the same thing a black person would say, right? But they just they're just the ones on stage. Like they get props, they get you. I mean, I don't know if you guys could pick up when you. I feel like in the audience you could hear, some, people laughing. Some people giggling. I can't. I mean, I don't want to guess at the ethnicity. I feel like I could guess, but I don't want to. But the point being, because I mean, like I said, this isn't Hague, so I can't be too sure. But the point being that, for saying the same thing as African people, or what we've always been saying, other people still would get more credit for saying it. And that's really one of the things. I want to keep reading the comments though. So, Bit of Medicine says, yes, and also there's a thing in Eurasians which our folk call it evil, but there's a thing that I can't quite find the word for it. Yeah, and that's the truth, right? I mean, it's like the lion and the tiger have a different nature. The lion and the gazelle have a different nature. I don't want to call a lion evil, for eating the gazelle, for hunting, because that's just what they do. It's what the lion does. It's nature. I mean, Marimba Ani might say the asili, but the point being that there's just something like this is them, and that's really all it is to it. But yeah, as far as debt and control is concerned, that's what it is. And actually, it's pretty interesting because white people do put this stuff on paper, and it kind of comes back to this idea of they kill you and then they put somebody else, blah blah blah. They kill you, put somebody else, right? And then then whoever comes in that agrees, and then there's the people, say, oh, that's a good representative for us. That's whatever, or like essentially, you have to have somebody inside of your faction that's going to compromise and work with the enemy. You have to have somebody inside of your faction that's going to compromise and work with the enemy. All right? Because otherwise, the whole population would turn against the Eurasians. So you have to have somebody in the population to say, yes, I'll take that check. Because even if they kill you, right? The reality is that who's going to run your nation? Well, they might. Well, they would have to then send a bunch of white people to run it. If no black person, right, would say would shirk their principles, then they would have to send a white person to do it. But instead of sending a white person, they find a black person who says, yeah, okay, I'll sell out. And I mean, of course, like Bitter Medicine Podcast would say, it comes down to education, and I'm not saying that it's an easy choice to not sell out, or it's an easy choice to sell out. I'm not going to say either, but the point being that it really comes back down to how do you get a sellout? A lot of times you couldn't find a sellout. What they did was that they I mean, and actually I think this guy's going to talk about it. They would educate you, they would give you the ideology in a sense of selling out, and then you would sell out. But this is something that we can actually work against and work on as a people.
My prisoner. Okay, so that has been this huge spider's web which has trapped Sub-Saharan Africa and keeps them held there. Aid, debt. We have a third structure which is again not known by many people, but it's something that was put in place and continues to this very day, with no one discussing it. No one says anything about it. It is monopoly buying structures. This is for all raw materials and basic agricultural goods produced by developing countries. There are only 4 or 5 Western multinationals that buy all those goods. And they collude between them. So if you take any major product, these Western multinationals, they collude between them. Even if we go down to banana production, we had a PhD done here at the ISS, and the person showed that the 4 or 5 major multinationals, they collude, and in order to make sure they control is total, what they do is they force all the producers to produce the same uniform banana. You know, the crap you buy in the West and has no taste at all. You go to any developing country, you know how a banana tastes, don't you? There's so many of them, lots of varieties, but we only market one or two types, so we have control, you see. If you don't produce at the price I want you to produce, I go to the next country. You see, we get control. So these buyers, they impose that control, and they keep pushing the prices down and down and down. Okay, this is the game.
And I that's actually pretty interesting. I'm not gonna trip, but here's the thing I want to point out about that. It kind of tells you that one of the issues is that you are not a buyer. You are not a buyer. Because you are not a buyer, even though like he was saying, certain countries might have nice tasting bananas, if you will, or fruits or whatever, right? Even though they might have that, people are not going to produce those if you're not buying. Again, trade, if you went back to the warship from last week, where I discussed, where actually an African proverb was such that trade is not something that's imaginary and descriptive, but real and profitable. People are slowly going to, no one's going to grow the real nice banana if no one's going to buy it. Okay? No one's going to grow, let's say cotton or whatever if no one's going to buy it. No one's going to grow rice if no one's going to buy it. You have to be a buyer. That's what you have to start doing. You have to read this Wazungu's economic system and see its weakness. Its weakness being that anybody could be a buyer if you try. Basically its weakness is that it's underpaying the farmers, right? And that means that all you have to do is not underpay the farmers. You understand? All you have to do is pay more than what the farmer, then the farmer can negotiate, then the farmer can have some leeway. But if you're not doing that, if you're just sitting back and complaining and whining and seeing the system for what it is and all that, if you're just doing that and sitting by, it's nothing's going to change. Because at the end of the day, the farmer still needs to eat. The farmer still needs to eat. If you have to start buying or doing something, some people might say, well, we got to do something more radical than that. Sure, go for it. Go for it. But the reality is that you have to start doing something. You have to see the situation for what it is and do something about it. See the weaknesses and exploit those weaknesses.
No one says anything about it. There are no commissions of inquiry to say this is illegal what you're doing. The WTO has nothing to say about this. But sorry to say, if banana prices rose 10 times, especially for people like me who love bananas, okay, I'd protest. I like my living standards. Okay, it's the same with all the other raw materials, you see. We're all benefiting, we're complicit. We're actually complicit in this because we will protest and shout out if the situation ever change.
And that's the point right there. I just want you to highlight just so because you might have just skipped over that. He said the Westerners are complicit in the domination of other people, particularly because we want the cheap produce. We want the cheap foods. We want the cheap goods. We want the cheap so on and so forth. This is where you would see, as I pointed out, the standard of living is proportional to Africa's oppression. Because essentially your standard, like a free Africa, liberated Africa, would mean that the standard of living outside of Africa is dramatically reduced. And of course, the people in the West, or the East, do not want this for their people. You understand? Already we're complaining about the inflation, We're complaining about how expensive university is. We're complaining about how expensive food is. We're complaining about so on and so forth. In fact, when COVID hit and you no longer had a sale every day, right? A sale on everything. People were like, man, groceries are really expensive. Right now, for instance, the West is going through stealing a lot of Westerners, particularly white folk. I'm saying white folk are now stealing food from grocery stores. You know, a lot of people are feeling hurt, the crunch. In fact, because of COVID, there are long lines. It's not really too publicized, or maybe it is. I just don't follow the Western media, but there are long lines of people going to food pantries. Like getting free food because they run out of food. They're going hungry. This is what's happening in the West, and that's happening just from COVID that they can obviously get over. What would happen in kind of a situation of African liberation in a sense, or African nationhood and African nation building would be worse for them, and they don't want that. They don't want to be starving because African people want to stop laying down. A lot of the Westerners that you joke with, that you clown with, that you talk to, that you whatever, they are profiting off of Africa's subordination. They're complicit in it. All the leftists that you see, sitting down on their armchairs talking revolution, they're not interested in revolution. They're interested in getting you away from the solution, which is, of course, Pan-African nationalism or that kind of stuff, or turning away from white folk. They don't want that. A lot of these leftists, they're just talking and sharing articles and talking, racism and capitalism. It's okay. That's what you're going to. That's what they're going to say. That's how they're going to talk. But it's nothing compared to what's really going on, which is that they're supporting the system, which maybe the United States government that obviously everybody pays 30% of their taxes to, right? But that sort of is a system that is actively oppressing oppressing the nations, the populations in Africa. Okay? Actively.
Okay, now we come to those international institutions, and I must tell you this from the outset: don't think of them as wicked. IMF, World Bank, WTO. We always think evil creatures. Horrible. It's not. It's just economics.
You see that?
It's economic warfare. The rich declare war on the poor. It happens everywhere. It happens in a country. The rich control the government. Of course they do. You really believe you have democracy? Come on.
All right, so this is about the universalizing. I want you to realize the universalizing. He says it's not that they're evil, and I don't use the word evil, just like you saw Bitterman's podcast say. He doesn't want to use the word evil, right? But he says it's just economics. No, it's not just economics. It's Wazungu economics. The Eurasian has been exploiting people from the time he was in a cave. Okay, exploitation is in the nature of the European, just as, or the Eurasian, just as pouncing on. Is that just as turning your back to a tiger will get you pounced on? Like you could look at a tiger and then you turn around and you will get teeth sunk into your neck. There's some things about the nature of animals. This is biology. It's just regular biology. It's not economics, it's biology. You understand?
Grow up. This is not about people living in democratic systems. What we have is the rich control. The rich set up these institutions explicitly to control the poor countries. And they don't give them much room for maneuver. Which incidentally, when the IMF starts talking of poverty alleviation, you should also understand that there's another game there also starting to play, which I'm going to come back to later. But what do these institutions do? What does the IMF do? What is structural adjustment about? It's about making sure countries keep producing what we want them to produce. We make sure they have recurrent balance of payments problems. You notice these countries never get out of balance of payments problems. You notice that? Whereas countries that never took IMF support are always out of balance of payments problems. But the countries that are continuously getting advice and support by the IMF, they're always in balance of payments problems. Why? Because that's the way we keep our stranglehold on them. And that's what we have done. We have done, the IMF and the World Bank. And they've also also done something very, very important. And that is they have destroyed the self-sufficiency of these countries. Colonization started it. Okay? One of the most important things is we destroy food self-sufficiency. Okay? And the World Bank continued it. They forced most countries to eliminate all food subsidies and food support. Okay? Because once you don't produce your own food, I increase my control over you. How do we know this? Well, very funny thing happened some years ago. Not so funny, actually. It involved starvation of a large number of people in Malawi. Okay? Many of you could remember this because it was really tragic. But the Malawian finance minister, who was under terrible threat at the time, suddenly broke ranks and he said, well, you know why we had this famine? Because one of the conditions of the loan given by the World Bank was we destroyed all our grain surplus stocks. Why? Because remember, we want you dependent.
Well, you see, this is the thing again, you know, you have to have, you know, it's like this brother was telling me, like, I tell you, I used to have these meetings, you know, shout out to the African blood siblings, right? All right. But anyway, we used to have these meetings, we meet up in Brooklyn, and there was this brother there who would tell us that, you know, like white terrorism in a sense, right, requires black cooperation. Like requires black complicity, you know? And he said this by saying, you know, like the example is this, that if the police are chasing a black person through your neighborhood, right, then the police are going to jump through your yard, police are going to jump through your, you know, and they're going to, basically you're not going to stop them, you're going to give them permission in a sense. You know, the same as if the police are chasing somebody in a vehicle. You know, you're going to pull to the side and let the police ride through. You know, anytime you hear the sirens, what you're going to do is you're going to pull to the side. Now, of course, I know you pull to the side because you believe it's illegal otherwise. You believe that you'll get in trouble otherwise, right? But the reality is that you make a conscious choice to assist the police and doing whatever they're doing, even if you know that if they're chasing a black person, they're probably going to shoot that person. Now, maybe they're not, but still, the point being that you know, or that if they're not going to shoot him, they're going to imprison him or something. They're not necessarily chasing him to give him $1 million or something. You know what I'm saying? But again, you have to cooperate. And so you see in Africa, you know, the IMF is saying, hey, look, we're going to give you this money if you destroy your food reserves. And black folk were like, sure, let's destroy our food reserves. You know, you had black people destroying the food reserve. Now, maybe, possibly, you had white folk who were like, actually, we're going to destroy it for you, right? No big difference because you had to let these white people go through your country, right? All the way to where you keep your food reserves or whatever you have, like your farms or whatever, and destroy all of that in your face, knowing that that has sustained you for how many centuries. You let them do that and walk out of there and said, yeah, I'll take some money. Like you have to be complicit. And again, you know, one of the things that we have to really get down to is understanding nation building, understanding nationhood, because if you're running a nation and you let this happen, right, you should not be running a nation. All right, if you're running a nation and you let this happen, you should not be running a nation. And I mean, I do want to speak to, right, Chaka said, ABS in the building, you already know, right? I do want to speak to this other thing that he said regards to the IMF, you know, going in and you know, saying, oh, if you're producing more material. The IMF has a point. If the IMF has this money, like if you go to a bank, if you go to a bank, all right, the bank says, I'll lend you this money under the condition that you have a business plan that I agree with. And that business plan, and basically I'm going to work with you on this business plan. Okay? So if the IMF is thinking you can make a lot of money by selling your resources to Europe, of course it's going to think that way. All right? Of course it's going to be thinking that way. So Aman Ra should not be running a nation, right? Yeah, Ben Master said Aman Ra. should not be running a nation. Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. Like you, if the IMF is not supposed to be thinking. I mean, the IMF could also say, yeah, you can make a lot of money by being an industrial nation, right? That's what you expect the IMF to do, right? But why would it? One, it doesn't. Why would it believe that? Why would it believe that you could make a lot of money from being an industrial nation, knowing that you don't have the industrial capacity? Knowing that you have a history of giving out resources, but also knowing that it could cut a deal two ways. You know, because if the IMF is a bank, you know, white people, I don't know if white people borrow from the IMF, they might, but if white nations are borrowing from the IMF, they might be borrowing to say, hey, I could do, like they might be in Europe saying, I just need a little more money so I could make more manufacturing, as long as the prices in Africa stay the same. So of course, if you go into the same damn bank that's supporting building up the industrialization of one of one continent, right? And that loan, if you will, it could be repaid based off of you selling resources. That's another way. Basically, what I'm saying is you're going. You know, it's you know, Alton Maddox Jr., the attorney at war. He was I was in his organization. He used to say he used the word Negroes, but he said Negroes always knocking on the wrong door, talking to the wrong people, and asking the wrong questions. You knocked on the wrong door, you went to the IMF station, you knocked on the wrong door, you talked to the wrong people, you talked to the people in the IMF, and you asked them the wrong questions. You know? And again, they have no incentive to stop if they are accruing interest. Exactly, as long as you can pay the interest, right? Nobody cares if you can't pay the loan. Because as long as you can pay the interest, right? As long as you're paying the interest and you're paying the loan, you are eternally in debt. And as long as you already signed to them, you know, the collateral, you already signed to them this and that. Because you already signed all that stuff, they can walk inside of your nation, go to your food reserves and take it. You know, they could take over this building, they could take over that building. If y'all remember, I think China took over a couple of buildings in one of these African nations. Just took over some buildings, took over some resources, took over some land because it's in the contract. And if you remember, there was this other this speaker, the sister. She used to work for the IMF, right? And she said she overheard her bosses saying that, you know, when the IMF goes to Asia, they always, like the Asians, you know, negotiate and co-negotiate to the point where the Asian walks out with a good deal, right? But the Africans, as soon as you put a paper in front of them, they sign it. You know? Now, part of it might be because they're afraid that somebody's going to kill them. Who knows? But the other part of it is that, you know, like you just, oh, well, I can get some money? Well, sure. I mean, if you want me to sell my soul, like, come on. You know, we have to do better. And again, you know, but of course, you know, it goes back to what Marcus Garvey said, which was that if you have not taught somebody to do better, you can't expect them to do better. So we have to be about really seriously considering nationhood. Of course, this is where I would, you know, tell y'all about my book on nationhood, which is the Book of Power. But outside of that, you know, we really have to be serious. You know, because and actually, it's really important that I mention, you know, my own literature, because what I've noticed is that a lot of us tend to look at the literature of not only other people, but also, like, and other people I mean by other races, but also, you know, the people in our race who really weren't serious about nation building. You know, and because they weren't serious about nation building, you would become less serious if you engaged in that work too. You know, or you wouldn't be serious if you engaged in that work. You know, so a lot of the staples of the African community are people who mostly talk about the victimization of black people, which isn't enough in terms of, you know, well, what can we do as a people to really advance and move forward? And that's really like what it comes down to.
In the 1970s, the US Senate, the US Congress said, we will not allow Latin America to produce their own food. We will start a strategy involving the IMF and the World Bank to destroy food self-sufficiency of Latin America. Then they will indeed be our true backyard. And that's exactly what they've done. Look at all the Latin American countries. Look at them. They used to be food self-sufficient, but they're no longer food self-sufficient. Now here comes the kicker. This is the beautiful part of it. I congratulate them. You know I admire them because they do it so well. Okay? I know it sounds really perverse. But we have now in the WTO something called the Agreement on Agriculture. Okay? You know what that Agreement on Agriculture states? It says, if you don't have any subsidies, you're not allowed to put these subsidies on food. But if you have subsidies and income support for food production, you can keep them. Who has all the subsidies and income support? US, Europe. The largest budgets in the world for supporting their farmers are Europe and US. But the World Bank and IMF have destroyed all those subsidies. You see, all those subsidies have been destroyed. And now we're telling these countries, you don't have subsidies? Tough luck, you know. You see, we're keeping them dependent. We're keeping them on a string. I have 5 minutes, so I have to be choosy about what I say next. We have lots of examples in the WTO to really stop Africa industrializing. This is the crucial thing. We cannot allow them to produce manufacturers. It's not difficult. Trust me, it's not difficult. We need nationalist governments. We need them committed to industrialization, and it won't take them a decade to move out from where they are.
You heard that though? Dude just said you need nationalist governments. He's like, look, honestly, everybody knows, and this is what I'm saying, this is one thing that you have to realize, that everybody knows that nationalism is the key forward, is the way forward. Everybody's distracting you with a bunch of nonsense and malarkey. Now remember, this is like a world-renowned Marxist. Okay, world-renowned Marxist. If you look at his other lecture, here's another lecture, a couple of other lectures. Shout out to Author Zor for sending me the link to him, right? But and of course he was going viral on Twitter or whatever. But he's a world-renowned Marxist. He's gonna tell you need capitalism. You know what I'm saying? He's not gonna distract you with socialism. He's not gonna distract you with this, that, and so forth. He's telling you need nationalism and you need capitalism. By capitalism, of course, he just means industrialization. But all the same, he says you need industrialization, you need nationalism to a strong. I think it might be this lecture or another lecture where he says you need a strong government. Every nation advances on a strong government. And I don't know if it's this one or another one, but he's going to tell you, China didn't advance through socialism but through capitalism, right? So he's telling you this. And of course, again, by capitalism, what he means is industrialization, manufacturing, so on and so forth. That's really a way forward. And you notice I said a way forward. I didn't say the way forward. I said a way forward. But still, the reason why he's saying this as a Marxist. Okay, you have to understand that there's a lot of black people who are going to tell you, oh, blah, 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 socialism, oh, blah, 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 this, and oh, blah, 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 that, and oh, nationalism is bad, and oh, blah, 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 blah. And even this white boy, who's for some reason is getting thrilled by the sound of people starving or whatever, and, I understand what he was trying to say. But, he's like, oh, they have a good system and all that kind of stuff. I understand what he's trying to say. I'm not going to vilify him for that. But the point being that even this guy, world-renowned Marxist from all over the planet, whatever, right, is saying you need nationalism, but you won't say it.
This is the fundamental point. It's not difficult, but this next round of the WTO is designed to block that. If we had time, I would go through all the different things that they're trying to put into place to block anyone else getting on top of the ladder. You've read this book of Hajun Chang, Kicking Away the Ladder. You see, when we become rich, we make sure the others can't climb up the ladder and join us.
Yeah, I do want to read what you heard what he said. It was nice, but what Mchaka's saying in the thing says Marxism can only come about after wealth. How can you give equal resources to everyone when you have no wealth to begin with? LOL. And he says, hence the need to start with nationalism. And I think it's really important that we understand that Marxism, because this thing is that this guy is actually, he's a Marxist in the sense of, like, when he was younger, he would look into Marxism and he would be interested by the socialism and the revolutionary, whatever. But then I think he says that when he got older, he saw Marxism more as a quote unquote science, and more of an objective, speech on, more of it and from an economic standpoint, right? And so from an economic standpoint, now here's the important thing. Marxism is really a book of science fiction. Like science fiction in the sense of it's saying that eventually, basically, like if y'all remember the Jetsons, or if you heard of Futurama, or if you know Star Trek or Orville or Star Wars or whatever, right? These are like science fiction shows. A lot of them are obviously not as good as the other ones, but the reason why I bring them up is because what happens is the sci-fi universe, these sci-fi universes kind of have this materialization, like you can materialize goods or products or food, out of nowhere, like basically technology becomes so advanced that people don't really have to work, or even regular schmegular people can have, far out kind of things, the idea, like for instance, you go to Futurama, they're basically a delivery company, but they also have a spaceship, but the idea behind this, or like a spaceship, or materializing, all sorts of stuff. The point being that there's just things that you wouldn't really expect of a people. You wouldn't really expect from today, but if you were, say, in the 19th century and you were thinking that what's going to happen in the future, you might have thought, hey, in the future, because of all this mechanization, people will not have to work, and because people will not have to work, you will not need a bourgeoisie demanding that you work, right? Because everything's going to be mechanized, everything's so on and so forth. Basically, that kind of world really will never happen, because in order for that world, because it doesn't make any sense from the perspective that, realistically speaking, the resources that will go into this industrialized future where nobody has to work would still have to come from Africa. You know what I mean? We'll still have to. Now, maybe you could say, well, we could just mechanize, mining, mechanize, so on and so forth. And I mean, that's not really to say that that's impossible. But all the same, it's this kind of a world that's not really at present any sort of no capitalist nation at present is developed in that sense, in that regard, that they are like auto mining the mines in Africa, and everything is as mechanized and whatever. But Marxism is assuming that if the world does come to that, then yes, the social order will no longer require you to go to work. Obviously, because that never happened, there's no such. But that only happens. Sorry, that only happens when capitalism develops to that stage, right? But capitalism has not developed to that stage anywhere. And it's very unlikely that capitalism will develop to that stage anywhere, right? I mean, the closest thing you could see to like a mechanized, world, or a mechanized country might be like Japan or something, where they have like waiters who are like machines or something. But but like it's not. But the world is not there yet, and it's only that kind of a nation that could eventually lead to a leisurely, so on and so forth. So that's why I say it's more science fiction, But again, But now here's the trouble. Now when black folk, when black folk or white folk or whoever is talking about socialism prior to capitalism developing to the point where people do not have to work, that's when the confusion of Marxism and socialism and so on and so forth really comes into play, because you can't really have this quote unquote Marxism, or basically that the quote unquote revolution that the proletariat have against the bourgeoisie in order to overthrow the bourgeoisie doesn't really add up. It would be premature in any sort of nation as they stand today, because the technology is just not there, and it looks like the technology is never going to be there, because it's not the case that like Africa's mining and mineral resources, it's not mechanized. It's being done by children, and no one seems to have an interest in mechanizing it. So I mean, like Mchaka said, Marxism only comes about through wealth. It comes about through wealth and like really high technology to the level of like the Jetsons or something, you know, where well, you know, like to the level of like, you know, like really high mechanization all over the planet, which just doesn't, it's just not realistic.
Okay, and this is what this next Doha round is about. It's to make sure, especially sub-Saharan African countries, do not escape. Since I have about 3 minutes left, I'm going to go to this economic ideology thing, because this is important for academics. You see, we teach, in many cases, garbage, and it doesn't hurt anyone, a lot of this garbage. You know, it's just blah, 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 blah. And we don't know what we have learned, but anyway, we were there at the university, and you got a certificate, and you go away, and you feel you've learned something. But sometimes we teach very destructive things. And no more important than when we're teaching people from developing countries. Okay? And one of those very damaging and destructive things is the doctrine of comparative advantage. It's a lie from beginning to end. It's utter crap. It has been decimated many times, but we keep it in every curriculum. Why? Because it tells sub-Saharan African countries that their destiny is to produce raw materials, you see. And if you produce raw materials, you get rich just like we are in the West. You see, this is the game we're playing, and just for you to be totally confused, we normally build models with it, mathematical models, so you really have no idea what we're talking about. But it seems all very scientific. Then we have the modern version of this is because it's all a failure, we know it's a failure, we now have a new generation of economists saying, it's only a failure because you're all corrupt in your country.
And this is actually pretty important right here. I want you to know this because this is one of the things that we hear about Africa all the time, which is, African people are corrupt. And I'm not saying they aren't. But that's the thing that we hear about African governments all the time. And of course, again, it fits into the narrative of, you know, blame the victim, you know, or even don't blame the system. You know? Blame the victim, don't blame the system. It's true because it rhymes, right? But anyway, but that's one of the things that, you know, we also need to look at when we're communicating to our people. You know, should we blame the victim? Now, of course, it is the case that, you know, people are just walking out with money, you know, money laundering, so on and so forth. And, you know, to what extent it really, you know, hinders the nation, that's a whole other question. Because like I usually say is that, you know, usually when I hear people say something is corrupt, I say, you know, well, Zungu is corrupt too. You know what I mean? Like if you look at America, there's this, there's like the whole concept is called like pork legislation. But a lot of legislation, you know, just has like funding for random things that are related to a particular senator wanting something in return to, you know, passing this legislation. So you might have legislation on, you know, military spending, and then you're also funding, you know, the children's resort that they go to or something, you know, something like that. You know, but you know, like or you know, whatever, like a children's park or something, whatever. But the point being that, you know, like a lot of these countries have that corruption. Corruption is kind of normal, but it's also a part of the blame the victim and not the system. You know, as to say that is the system of just shipping out raw materials really going to get you on a comparative level of another people? And of course not. You know, one of the brothers on Twitter, he's a cool brother, and he was like X spots the mark, I think, right? And what he said was like some sister was complaining about how other groups like Chinese might come in and have restaurants or hair salons, and the Arabs might have restaurants, and the Koreans might have nails, or whatever, right? And she's like, look how these people come inside and then they have control, you know, blah, blah, blah. And then the brother said, look, you really can't use hair salons and restaurants. That's not going to liberate a country. Like, that's not going to give you power. It's not going to give you liberation of a country. It's not going to give you autonomy or anything. It's just regular service sector. And of course, you know, I added, because, you know, like I said, I also mentioned this stuff in the Book of Power. So, you know, it's just really something that, you know, you should know when you read it. Or you'll know when you read it. But one of the things is that if you're a foreigner, you come into this country on invitation. You know, like if you went through the immigration channel And America said, look, I'll help you out. You know, you come to my country, I'll help you out because I want you here. You are a wanted guest, right? The thing is that if you're an unwanted guest, they don't want you here. And to, you know, really illustrate the point, you know, once upon a time, black people owned those hair salons, those nail places, those so on and so forth. It didn't mean that we had power then. It didn't mean that we had control then. It didn't mean that we had autonomy then. It didn't mean that we had culture then. It didn't mean that we had good economics then. It's just a matter of, yeah, we did actually own these little small shops. But those are not necessarily instruments for nations and nation building and power building. You know? There's much more to it. You know, so I mean, I think that's really something I want you to know, because again, like, the video is about to end, so.
We call that new institutional economics. You've all probably learnt it all, but you didn't know why they invented it. It was invented to tell you the same thing. You should keep producing raw materials. Now, don't be as corrupt as you were before. Nobody ever told you that aid was designed to actually start the corruption process in the first place. Okay, and we need corruption to make sure you're doing all these things. But now we blame the victim. You're poor because it's your fault, basically. And you're poor, stupid, and corrupt, basically. This is the message that we're giving people.
And you heard that. He said they make the corruption so that, like essentially the system, they are making the corruption. You know, the Wazungu was making the corruption. Wazungu was paying so-and-so to sign this paper. You know, to sign this trade agreement. You know, or to basically export the resources at this little price, they get a signer's fee or a finer's fee. You see what I'm saying? Like the corruption that you complain about is exactly that. You know, obviously some cases, you know, because like you know, there was a conversation and Chaka pointed out that sometimes, you know, some African leaders will just straight up steal from the bank. But in other cases, it is a case of, you know, like with the lobbyists. You know, the lobbyist kind of pays, you know, so and so. You know, here in America, for instance, the lobbyist pays so and so to get a better deal in you know, in the long run. You know, to get a big deal. So I like, for instance, let's just use a random corporation like Sony. Sony pays, you know, Senator whatever, or let's not use a real senator's name. So let's use Senator, let's say Howard. Senator Howard, you know, Sony pays him $1 million so that when the legislation comes around for the United States to send, you know, to have a sound system in this new building they're making, they're going to purchase it from Sony, and that's going to be a $1 billion contract. You know what I mean? So the United States is now going to give $1 billion basically because, or even $30 million because Sony gave $1 million to Senator Howard. You get what I'm saying? So that's like the corruption, a quote unquote corruption, but it's really just, you know, plain sight lobbying. But still, that's just a normal aspect of quote unquote government and geopolitics.
Also have many theoretical justifications, but I'm going to say something controversial to end. And she's happy that I'm ending because she has to discipline me. And that is, there are also what I call more enlightened approaches, but which are also potentially destructive for sub-Saharan African development. And this is where I come back to the IMF and the World Bank. You see, now they're all into poverty alleviation. They want you to concentrate on redistributing income, and it's something nice. You're young people, you're socially conscious, you're aware. You don't like all this injustice. So you gravitate towards what we call pro-poor strategies. But actually, I'm sorry to tell you, that is not what Africa needs. Africa needs aggressive industrialization. When China was a communist country and we had equal distribution, who feared China? Who took them seriously? They weren't even the size of the Netherlands. But today, I can't open an internet site. I can't open a magazine. I can't open a newspaper without China, 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 China. And we know what has built China is not socialism or communism, it's capitalism, guys. It's manufacturing, it's production. This is what creates employment. This is what creates a job. So I'm not pro-capitalist, but this is the reality. And unfortunately, we're now going to get caught with the good cop, bad cop. The good cop is now IMF saying, oh, you must concentrate on poverty reduction and income redistribution, as long as we can take you away from industrialization. This is the crucial thing. You know? I leave it at that. And I'm sorry I took so
much. Okay, so you kind of heard that last point. I should have paused before whatever for these recommendations showed up. Luckily, nothing bad in my recommendations. But look at that. They got the audio book for How Europe Developed Africa. So, like I said, Underdeveloped Africa. So, like I said, you can also, if you want to listen to podcasts, and, you know, like, if you like playing video games or whatever, like a casual game, right? You could listen to the audio book for How Europe Underdeveloped Africa in the background. Or you can listen to Patrice Lumumba speak. Or you can listen to, this is the other lecture, Economics in Simple Terms, Public, with Dr. Howard Nicholas. This was another one that I listened to. That's the one that Author Zora linked me with, and so on and so forth. And this right here is Economic Hitman Confesses and Calls to Action. So this is the book, and it's a TEDx. TEDx is not really TED Talks, but you get what I'm saying. This is also part 3 of that speech, which is by Akinya. I'm gonna probably listen to that one another time. But I think that last point, I wanted to just play it out. I wanted to just play it out so that you could hear it in its entirety. That last point was pretty critical. Oh yeah, basically the pro-poor rhetoric. Pro-poor, socialism, income distribution, so on and so forth. Like Mchaka was saying, you can't really have that income distribution just yet. What you want to do, and this is the thing that people have to understand about what capitalism is. Capitalism is when basically what it is this, that industrialization is too expensive for one individual. Industrialization is too expensive for one individual, right? And because it's too expensive for one individual, capital essentially has to come inside. Basically financial capital has to come inside. And the only question is, who takes up the risk of industrialization? Who takes up the risk of building 50,000 Tamagotchi toys? Who takes up the risk? Is it the government or a private individual? A private individual with a bank. Is it a government or a private individual? And so that's really what capitalism is. It's the question. It answers the question of who takes up that risk. Now, some people make it into what's the worker exploitation, blah, 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 without understanding that somebody has to take up the risk of industrialization. Because the reality is that if you build all these Tamagotchis and Tamagotchis aren't the right time, then you are going to go broke. If you build up the, if you build up a video game system at the same time that PS5 comes out, right, you at a loss. KWZ Radio says thumbs up. Mchaka does say, yeah, Whitey's corrupt, but we talking about ourselves though, bruh. Bit of Medicine says, we know them, we got to fix us. Yeah. It's the thing is this, that when we are borrowing from a Western system, we have to realize that we're going to be westernized. Like you're borrowing from a Western system, so you're going to be westernized. So that's the reason why I would talk about what's generally happening. And the reason why I would say what's generally happening is because you have to compare the two. And you say, well, look, even if this thing is quote-unquote bad, like, is this the full story of something being bad if everybody's doing that? Why is it worse for us? It's worse for us because we are not manufacturing. It's worse for us because we are not industrialized. It's worse for us because we don't understand how to use capital to our advantage. Capital, again, is just, you have a giant bank, or you have a bank that says, yeah, we'll put up the railroads. Like we'll fund your effort to put up railroads. We'll fund your effort to put up trains. Again, buyers. Again, lenders. You know, and this is another thing that I put inside the Book of Power that you're not really going to see from these from the other people, which is, you know, you have to study banking. You have to learn banking. You know, we can talk about other groups all we want, and other groups and their influence in banking all we want, but you have to realize how instrumental banking is to capitalism, or to industrialization. You know, because again, you can't afford it. I told you guys last time, $11 million, in the United States, $11 million for a factory. But again, that factory is not cheap in Africa. You know, the tractor isn't cheap in Africa. You know, one of these brothers one time showed us a cement machine. It may be like $4,000 or something, right? So it's kind of cheap, you know, but it was like a natural, you know, turn dirt into cement kind of machine. But again, $4,000, who has $4,000? You know, on the continent. Now, I might have $4,000. You might have $4,000, but that's the point. We have to get down there, and then of course you have to have a whole market for whatever it is you're doing. Like, you have to have a market for these cement blocks. You know, and that's a whole interconnected network. And again, you know, I want to emphasize, when you're a bank, you want your business to succeed. You know, so you loan the money to somebody to get this $4,000, cement creator, right? Now you as a bank want to connect this person with a cement buyer. You know, just the same, the IMF says, hey, we're going to connect your raw material exports to a raw material buyer, because there's really not too many African people who are buying raw materials. You understand? Because we're not even manufacturing. So the bank itself is connecting you with another one of its businesses, or a partner business who is looking to buy the materials. Basically what I'm saying is that you have to study even banking, and nobody's really telling you this. I'm telling you this, but nobody else is really telling you this. This is why, I want to end on that note, matter of fact, that you have a choice. Now, you have a couple of choices. One, you know, obviously like, subscribe, share up, sign up for the Discord, you know, sign up for the class coming in January. It's almost January, so come on, you know, sign up for everything. You know, ask questions in the Discord, click the link in the description, but also get yourself the Book of Power and start studying and reading. Okay? Start studying and reading, because, you know, this was a nice presentation, right? You will learn that kind of stuff if you engage, well, when you engage in the Book of Power. But other than that, you know, thank you so much, everybody, for listening. It was a pleasure. I hope you enjoyed it. You know, and thanks for sticking with me. And, you know, I'll hear from you guys another time. And Shem Yem Hotep.